The sun glistened across the calm waters as I stood on my newly purchased dock, taking in the panoramic view that had convinced me to invest my life savings into this lakeside paradise. The gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh water, filling my lungs with a sense of accomplishment. After 3 years of overtime shifts and careful saving, I had finally done it. I had purchased my dream home. The weathered wood beneath my feet creaked slightly, reminding me of the repairs needed, but I did not mind. This dock was mine. The shoreline was mine. The small sandy beach area was mine. Even the pool nestled between my modest home and the water's edge was mine. Every inch of this property belonged to me, and the feeling of ownership filled me with quiet pride. I surveyed my new kingdom with satisfaction. The real estate agent had been particularly thorough in explaining the property boundaries, knowing I had specifically sought a lakefront home outside of any homeowners association jurisdiction. The neighboring subdivision, Lakeview Estates, with its perfect lawns and uniform houses, ended precisely 12 feet from my eastern property line. The agent had pointed out the survey markers and explained that while Lakeview Estates residents had their own community beach access point several hundred feet down the shoreline, my property was completely independent. As I contemplated the peaceful years ahead, I noticed a small group of people at the community beach access point. They stared in my direction with undisguised interest. One woman in particular, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and designer sunglasses, seemed to be studying my property with unusual intensity. She pointed toward my dock while speaking to her companions. I waved politely, but received only stiff nods in return. That evening, as the sun set over the lake casting brilliant orange and pink reflections across the water, I unpacked boxes in my new home. Through the large windows, I could see the dock silhouetted against the colorful sky. The real estate closing documents lay spread across my kitchen table, including the property survey that clearly delineated my ownership extending to the water and 20 feet into the lake itself. I had been particularly careful about this point during purchase. The county records confirmed my property had been specifically carved out from the Lakeview Estates development during initial construction. While their pristine, cookie-cutter homes formed a neat community governed by strict HOA rules, my more natural, private oasis existed as its own entity. I had intentionally avoided properties with HOA entanglements after hearing countless horror stories from friends who had battled overzealous boards. As night fell on my first day as a lakefront property owner, I sat on my back porch with a celebratory glass of wine. The moonlight danced on the gentle waves, and the distant sound of a boat motor reminded me of the recreational opportunities awaiting me. Little did I know that my peaceful retreat was about to become ground zero for a territorial battle that would test my patience, my rights, and ultimately, my resolve. The unmistakable sound of laughter and splashing drew me from my morning coffee to the window overlooking my pool. I blinked several times, certain I must be imagining the scene before me. 3 unfamiliar children splashed in my pool while 2 women I had never met lounged in chairs they had brought onto my deck. Confusion gave way to disbelief as I watched them casually using my property as if it were a public park. I slipped on my shoes and stepped outside, clearing my throat as I approached. "Good morning," I said politely but firmly. "I am sorry, but this is private property. The pool belongs to my home." The taller woman with highlighted blonde hair and oversized designer sunglasses, the same one I had spotted yesterday, barely glanced up from her magazine. "Oh, hello," she said with casual dismissiveness. "Do not worry. We are just enjoying the amenities. This has always been community access." Her tone carried the confidence of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. The children continued splashing, completely ignoring our conversation. The second woman at least had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," I explained, maintaining my composure. "I purchased this home and property last week. The pool, dock, and shoreline are part of my private property. They are not community amenities." The blonde woman finally lowered her sunglasses, looking at me with thinly veiled annoyance. "You must be the new owner. Perhaps you do not understand how things work around here. Lakeview Estates residents have always had access to this area. It is part of our community features." When I mentioned my deed and property rights, her smile tightened as she gathered her magazine and towel. "Come along, children," she called sharply. "We will come back another time." As they collected their belongings, I heard her mutter loudly to her companion, "The new people never understand how things work around here. This will get sorted out." The entire encounter left me feeling unsettled. That evening, I double-checked my closing documents, confirming once again that my property boundaries included the pool, dock, and shoreline. There was no mention of easements or community access rights. Nothing in the disclosure statement indicated shared use of any amenities. The following morning, I discovered a typed note neatly tucked into my door frame. Printed on Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association letterhead, it detailed community standards and shared waterfront etiquette. The note explained the historical access arrangement and requested that I refrain from making disruptive claims about exclusive ownership. It was signed by the board, with no specific names or contact information. I stared at the note in disbelief. The audacity was astounding. Despite my property being explicitly outside their jurisdiction, they were attempting to assert control over my land. That afternoon, I found myself at the county records office, speaking with a helpful clerk who pulled the original plat maps and development plans for the area. My finger traced the clear boundary lines on the official documents, confirming what I already knew. Every inch of this contested paradise belonged solely to me. The clerk pointed out that my property had been deliberately excluded from the Lakeview Estates HOA covenant restrictions during development. There were no easements, no access agreements, and no shared amenities listed in any official records. As I drove home, I noticed several people walking down my dock, fishing rods in hand. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. It was time to have a more serious conversation about boundaries. The doorbell rang with impatient repetition early Saturday morning. The sound echoed through my still unpacked home, startling me from my quiet breakfast. I opened the door to find the woman from the pool incident, now flanked by two men in matching polo shirts embroidered with the Lakeview Estates logo. Their expressions ranged from stern to openly hostile. "Good morning," the woman said with artificial pleasantness. "I am Brenda Whitfield, HOA Board President for Lakeview Estates. These are my colleagues, Richard Barton and Thomas Jenkins. We need to discuss the situation with your property." I invited them in reluctantly, offering coffee which they declined. We gathered in my living room, the lake visible through the large windows behind us. Brenda's smile never reached her eyes as she launched into her rehearsed speech. "There seems to be a misunderstanding about your property," she began, her voice carrying practiced authority. "While we understand you are new to the area, there are certain community arrangements you should be aware of." The taller man, Richard, produced a faded document from a leather portfolio. "This outlines the historical easement rights to the waterfront amenities," he explained, sliding it across my coffee table. I picked it up, immediately noticing it was not a legal document but rather an internal HOA newsletter from 8 years prior that simply mentioned, continued lake access via the eastern shoreline. This is not a legal easement, I pointed out, returning the paper. And even if it were, my property exists outside your HOA jurisdiction entirely. Thomas leaned forward. We have maintained that dock and pool area for years, he claimed, though I had seen no evidence of professional maintenance. Our residents have enjoyed access to this area for 15 years. Previous owners understood the arrangement. Brenda's expression hardened. We have never had problems before you arrived, she stated coldly. The community values these amenities greatly. We can make homeownership here very pleasant or very difficult. It is your choice. The threat hung in the air as they stood to leave. We will give you some time to reconsider your position, Brenda added. The neighborhood barbecue is next weekend. It would be nice to announce that our new neighbor has graciously continued the community access tradition. Their retreating figures left an unspoken threat hanging in the air. I closed the door behind them, my mind racing. Their visit had confirmed my suspicions. They had been using my property for years without any legal right to do so. The previous owner had either been intimidated into compliance or simply did not care. That afternoon, I installed security cameras covering my pool, dock, and shoreline. The system sent alerts directly to my phone whenever motion was detected. I needed documentation of the trespassing before taking further action. I did not have to wait long. That evening, reviewing my security footage, I watched as a steady stream of residents casually used my dock for fishing, treating my private property as their personal playground. Some even had the audacity to move my pool furniture into new arrangements more to their liking. The next morning, I discovered an official-looking violation notice slipped under my door, printed on HOA letterhead and marked urgent. It detailed unauthorized barriers to community lake access and demanded I cease any attempts to restrict community amenities. The notice threatened further action if I failed to comply within 7 days. I contacted my real estate agent, who expressed surprise at the situation but recommended I consult an attorney specializing in property rights. This sounds like classic HOA overreach, she said, but you need proper legal guidance to handle it correctly. As I hung up the phone, another alert dinged on my screen. The security camera showed a family setting up a picnic on my dock, complete with a portable grill. The battle lines had clearly been drawn, and I needed to prepare for war. The morning sun reflected off the new private property, no trespassing signs I had posted prominently along my shoreline. The signs had cost me nearly $200, but the property attorney I consulted had advised they were necessary to establish clear notice of private ownership. Additionally, I had installed a simple but effective gate controlling access to my dock and pool area, secured with a sturdy padlock. The installation had been completed just yesterday, a necessary step after weeks of unauthorized visits captured on my security cameras. The attorney had been clear. Document everything, post proper notice, and secure your property boundaries. You have every legal right to control access to your land. I sipped my coffee on the back porch, feeling a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. The signs and gate represented a clear escalation in the conflict, but legally necessary to protect my property rights. My phone buzzed with a security alert around noon. The camera feed showed Brenda and 4 other residents standing at my locked gate, tugging at the chain and discussing among themselves. I watched for several minutes as they examined the lock, read the signs, and made phone calls. Finally, I decided to address the situation directly. I grabbed my property deed and surveyed documents from my desk drawer and headed outside. As I approached, Brenda's face contorted with indignation. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing dramatically at the gate and signs. "You cannot block community access to the lake. This is outrageous." I remained calm, holding my property documents visible in my hand. "Good afternoon, Brenda. As I have explained before, this is private property. The gate and signs are perfectly legal measures to protect my property rights." "Unlock this gate immediately," she demanded, her voice rising. "Our community has Memorial Day activities planned for this weekend. We always use the dock for our annual fishing competition." "I am sorry, but that will not be possible," I replied firmly. "This is private property, not community property. Your HOA has no jurisdiction here, and there are no legal easements granting access rights." Brenda's face flushed red. "You are being completely unreasonable," she spat. "This access has been available to our community for 15 years. You cannot just come in and change everything." The other residents murmured in agreement, though I noticed a couple exchanging uncertain glances. Perhaps not everyone was fully convinced of Brenda's claims. "My property rights are clearly established in these documents," I explained, holding up the deed and survey. "If you would like to discuss this further, please have your HOA attorney contact mine. But until then, I must ask you all to leave my property." Brenda pulled out her phone with theatrical flair. "I am calling the police. You cannot block access to the lake. This is illegal and you are becoming aggressive." I maintained my distance, making sure to appear non-threatening while standing my ground. "That is your right, Brenda. I will wait here for them to arrive." I watched in disbelief as she dramatically described to the 911 operator how I was threatening residents and restricting legal access rights. She claimed I was becoming aggressive and preventing lake access, painting a picture that bore no resemblance to reality. After ending the call, she turned to me with a triumphant smirk. "The police will straighten this out. I hope you are prepared to be embarrassed in front of everyone." The other residents seemed less certain now, uncomfortable with the escalation. One man in particular frowned at Brenda's tactics, backing away slightly. I remained calm, knowing the law was on my side. 40 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled into my driveway, their presence immediately drawing attention from neighboring houses. My heart pounded despite knowing I was in the right. First impressions matter, and Brenda had clearly attempted to paint me as the aggressor. As the officers approached, I took a deep breath, preparing to defend my property rights against this calculated escalation that had turned my dream home into a battleground. The taller officer addressed us both. "We received a call about a disturbance involving property access," he said professionally. "Can someone explain what is happening here?" Brenda immediately launched into her version, gesturing wildly about community access and aggressive behavior. I waited patiently for my turn, documents in hand, ready to present the facts that would end this confrontation once and for all. The afternoon sun beat down as the officers carefully reviewed my property documents. One officer, a veteran with graying hair who introduced himself as Officer Daniels, walked the boundaries with me while Brenda and her committee stood with arms crossed at the edge of my driveway. The younger officer, Rodriguez, remained with them, maintaining a professional distance. Officer Daniels nodded thoughtfully as we approached the water's edge, comparing the survey markers with the official county plat map I had provided. "These survey markers match perfectly with your documentation," he confirmed, pointing to the metal stakes that defined my property line. We returned to where Brenda and her group waited impatiently. "Ma'am," Officer Daniels finally addressed Brenda, These documents clearly show this is private property with no recorded easements or public access requirements. Brenda shook her head vehemently, her diamond earrings catching the sunlight. "That cannot be right," she protested, voice rising. "Our community has used this area for decades. We have historical precedent. The previous owner always allowed access." "Perhaps they did," Officer Rodriguez acknowledged, "but that would have been a personal choice, not a legal obligation." "We had verbal agreements," Brenda insisted. "The developer promised our community would always have access to this shoreline and dock. We have documentation." "May I see that documentation?" Officer Daniels requested. Brenda hesitated, then claimed it was at the HOA office. I noticed several of her companions shifting uncomfortably at this obvious evasion. The younger officer shook his head firmly. "Without written easements filed with the county, those agreements, if they existed, are not binding on the new owner. These signs constitute legal notice. Further entry would be criminal trespassing." "We maintain that dock," one of the men insisted. "We paid for repairs last summer." "Did you have written permission from the previous owner?" Officer Daniels asked. The man fell silent, answering the question through his hesitation. "Listen," Officer Rodriguez explained with remarkable patience. "Even if the previous owner allowed community use, that permission can be revoked by the new owner at any time unless there is a recorded easement or other legal agreement. The county records show no such documents exist." Brenda's face flushed with anger. "This is not over," she warned, turning to leave. "Our HOA attorney will be in touch. You will regret this." The officers remained until Brenda and her group had departed. "You might want to keep those security cameras running," Officer Daniels advised quietly. "Document any further incidents. If they return after this warning, call us immediately." I thanked them for their professionalism. As their patrol cars pulled away, I felt a momentary sense of relief. The police had confirmed what I already knew. The law was on my side. That feeling was short-lived. Their patrol cars had barely left when my phone rang with a call from Morgan Williams, the property attorney I had consulted earlier in the week. "I found something interesting," she explained, her voice conveying excitement. "You were right to be suspicious. I requested all HOA records related to your property through a formal discovery process. I found their HOA newsletters going back 5 years. They have been falsely telling residents they have rights to your dock and pool." "You can prove this?" I asked, hope rising. "Absolutely," Morgan confirmed. "In their spring newsletter from 3 years ago, the board president, that would be your friend Brenda, wrote an article about maintaining lake access amenities, despite what she called ownership complications. She specifically mentioned that the HOA was allocating funds for dock maintenance on property they did not own but had traditional access rights to." My mind raced with the implications. So they knew they had no legal right to my property. "It gets better," Morgan continued. "I found board meeting minutes where they discussed the potential sale of your property and strategies to ensure continued access without having to formalize arrangements. They were deliberately avoiding creating any legal document that would have required disclosure during your purchase." "That is fraud," I realized aloud. "Potentially," Morgan agreed. "The previous owner never granted formal easements, and your property was specifically carved out from HOA jurisdiction during the initial development. They have absolutely no legal right to access your property, regardless of past usage patterns." "What should I do next?" I asked. "Continue documenting everything," she advised. "Keep your security measures in place. And most importantly, Do not engage directly with Brenda or any board members without me present. They have been deliberately misleading their residents for years. They will not stop just because the police confirmed your rights." As I hung up, another alert from my security system showed a group of teenagers attempting to access my dock from the water using a small boat. They turned away only after noticing the cameras. This battle was far from over. The community center buzzed with animated conversation as I walked in with my attorney, Morgan. A hastily printed notice about an emergency meeting regarding lake access crisis had circulated through the neighboring development, and despite not being an HOA member, I decided direct confrontation was necessary. Morgan had advised against attending alone. "This is your opportunity to address the entire community at once," she had explained. "But we need to present a united legal front." The large room was filled beyond capacity, with residents standing along the walls. Eyes turned toward us as we entered, conversations falling silent momentarily before erupting into whispers. I recognized several faces from security footage of people who had attempted to use my property. Brenda stood at the podium, wearing a crisp blazer that matched the determined set of her jaw. Behind her, a projection screen displayed an outdated map of the development. She was pointing to deliberately highlighted incorrect property lines that suggested community ownership of my dock and pool. "For 15 years, our community has enjoyed these amenities," she declared to nodding heads. "The lakefront access is what many of you paid premium prices for. One difficult new neighbor should not destroy our property values and lifestyle." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I noticed how skillfully she avoided mentioning legal ownership, focusing instead on emotional appeals about community and property values. "The board is pursuing all available options," she continued confidently. "We have allocated funds from our reserves to address this situation legally if necessary. We ask for your patience and support during this challenging time." When the floor opened for comments, Morgan and I approached the microphone. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on us. I could feel the collective hostility, these people believing I had stolen something that had always been theirs. "Good evening," Morgan began professionally. "I am Morgan Williams, attorney for the legal owner of the property in question. Before anyone decides to support expensive legal action, you deserve to know the facts." She methodically presented the actual survey maps, property records, and county documents, which we had enlarged for easy viewing. "The property was deliberately excluded from HOA jurisdiction during development," she explained. "There are no easements, no legal access rights, and no shared amenities agreements filed with the county." Brenda attempted to interrupt, but Morgan continued firmly. "The HOA leadership has been misinforming you for years. This property has always been private, and the current board has known this for years." Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd as we distributed copies of their own newsletter, where Brenda had written about plans to continue allowing access despite legal complications. "That statement right there," Morgan pointed out, "demonstrates the board knew they had no legal right to access this property. They have been misleading you while collecting your HOA dues." An older gentleman stood up from the front row. "Is this true, Brenda? Did you know we had no legal right to that dock?" Brenda flushed, attempting to regain control. "We have historical precedent." "Historical precedent is not legal standing," Morgan interrupted firmly, "and the board knew this." We distributed additional copies of board meeting minutes, documenting their deliberate efforts to avoid formalizing access rights that would have required disclosure during my purchase. "What else have you not told us?" A woman called from the back of the room. "Are our HOA dues being used for legal battles we cannot win?" Residents turned accusatory eyes toward their leadership as the realization spread that they had been deliberately misled. Their HOA dues potentially funding improper actions against a private property owner who simply wanted to protect what was legally theirs. I stepped to the microphone, speaking directly to the residents rather than the board. "I understand your disappointment. You were told you had access to amenities that were never legally yours. I am not trying to be difficult. I simply want to enjoy the property I purchased, just as each of you do with your homes." "The board has misled you," Morgan added, "and has been planning to use your HOA dues to fight a legal battle they cannot win. Even if they pursued this in court, the outcome is certain. The property belongs exclusively to my client." Richard, one of the board members who had accompanied Brenda to my home, suddenly stood. "I resign from this board," he announced. "I cannot be part of an organization that has deliberately misled its members." He turned to me. "I apologize for my role in this situation." His unexpected move created a cascade effect. Calls for Brenda's resignation echoed through the room. The community that had been united against me just an hour before was now turning on their leadership, demanding accountability. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, Morgan and I made a quiet exit. "That went better than expected," she observed as we walked to our cars. "I think the community will now pressure the board to resolve this properly rather than continuing to fight." Looking back at the community center, I saw Brenda standing alone at the podium, facing the angry crowd she had assembled. The tide had turned, and the battle appeared to be nearing its end. The certified letter from the HOA's attorney arrived exactly 1 month after the explosive community meeting. I recognized the law firm's name on the return address and called Morgan immediately. She arrived within the hour, and we opened the envelope together at my kitchen table. It contained a formal apology acknowledging my property rights and the absence of any legal easements or access agreements. The letter admitted the HOA had incorrectly represented community access rights to the residents and offered a settlement covering damages to my pool equipment and landscaping from unauthorized use. "This is a complete surrender," Morgan observed, reviewing the enclosed check for $12,000. "They know they have no case, and they are trying to limit their liability before individual homeowners start suing the board for misrepresentation." The neighborhood newsletter, which someone had anonymously delivered to my mailbox, now featured a front-page retraction and clarification about property boundaries. The article explained that, due to an administrative oversight, residents had been incorrectly informed about access rights to certain lakefront areas. The apology was signed by the entire board, minus Brenda, who had resigned her position following a vote of no confidence. The transformation was remarkable. My security cameras now captured only authorized visitors, the occasional delivery person or service worker I had scheduled. The trespassing had stopped completely. The signs remained posted, but the tension that had permeated the neighborhood had largely dissipated. 3 weeks later, a tentative knock at my door revealed an elderly couple I recognized from the community meeting. They introduced themselves as the Hendersons, original Lakeview Estates residents who had lived there for over 20 years. "We wanted to personally apologize," Mr. Henderson explained. "We had always believed the dock was community property. Brenda and the previous board members assured us it was." Mrs. Henderson nodded in agreement. "We also wanted to ask, properly this time, if there might be a way for some of us to occasionally fish from a specific section of Shoreline. We understand it is your property and your decision entirely. Their humility and respect for my property rights touched me. After some consideration, I worked with Morgan to draft a limited license agreement that allowed scheduled access to a small section of shoreline for fishing only. The arrangement required advance notice and applied only to specific residents who had personally approached me with respect. The new HOA president, a retired judge who understood the legal implications of the previous administration's actions, had been instrumental in rebuilding community relations on foundations of respect rather than entitlement. He ensured the HOA newsletter now regularly reminded residents about property boundaries and respect for private property. As summer turned to fall, I sat on my dock watching the sunset reflect across the peaceful water. The battle had been stressful and unwelcome, but the outcome had given me something more valuable than just confirming my property rights. It had established clear boundaries, earned genuine respect, and transformed my lakeside paradise from contested territory into the peaceful haven I had originally envisioned. A few of the approved neighbors waved from their small fishing boat passing by, maintaining the respectful distance we had agreed upon. I waved back, feeling none of the tension that had characterized those early encounters. Sometimes standing your ground, knowing your rights, and refusing to be bullied, even when it would be easier to give in, creates not just personal victory but a healthier community for everyone involved. The lake waters lapped gently against the shore as darkness fell. My property, my boundaries, my rules, all respected at last. The battle had been won not just through legal means, but through principled determination that ultimately benefited everyone by replacing deception with truth, entitlement with respect, and conflict with cooperation.